Welcome to Mr. Powell, a 2024 Grammy nominated poet. We'll talk about that Grammy bit in a hot second. Is one of the most celebrated political, cultural, literary, and hip hop voices in America. Kev has gone on to be a poet and journalist and author of 16 books. The current one, Grocery Shopping with My Mother, his new collection of poetry, and his critically acclaimed autobiography, The Education of Kevin Powell, A Boy's Journey into Manhood, which is being adapted for the screen. Many accolades, many bylines, many publications on everything covering politics, hip hop. One of the most I think the most, how do I say this? Correct me if I'm wrong, Kev, but you have interviewed Mr. Tupac Shakur more than anybody else.
Hmm.
Is that a fair statement? Gotcha.
Yes,
I just wanted to
yes,
put
sir.
that in the universe. Tons and tons of bylines, as we know. And I can send links on where to find all of those works, including our most current. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce Kevin Powell. I said Kev, full disclosure, personal friend, have known this person for a very long time, who I've highly respected and trusted with all things. So one more round of applause. How you doing, sir?
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Jamal, thank you. Jesse, thank you so much. Uh, thank you to Atlassian. Thank you to this community. I appreciate you all having me. Happy Black History Month. Happy Tuesday. Happy February. I just want to say a few things and then make it as interactive as possible as soon as we can. I think first and foremost, just thank God for an opportunity again. We had a wonderful conversation. I believe, was it a year ago, Jesse and Jamal? Was it 2 years ago?
It was about a year ago.
Okay, I know we were still kind of in the midst of all the, a lot of the COVID stuff. So most of the stuff I was doing was virtual, and so I'm glad to be back with you all. I just want to, you know, I'm happy. My heart is full. I'm in California right now, Southern California. I'm based in New York City, but I'm here for a while working. I was definitely out here for the Grammys. We didn't win this year, but we'll try again soon in the next year or so to make another poetry album. It's a new category, best spoken word poetry album. But it was just exciting to be in a space with Tracy Chapman and Joni Mitchell. So I was happy for that. You know what I'm saying? Just to see them live. Joni's 80. Tracy Chapman has been not around for a long time. And it was just incredible to be in that space. But I just want to acknowledge Black History Month. I think all of us should know that Black history is American history, just like Women's History Month. Women's History Month next month is American history. Pride Month is American history. Asian Pacific Islanders, American history. Hispanic heritage is American history. Indigenous people is American history. Whether you're Jewish, Italian, Irish, Polish, differently able, disabled, no matter what your pronouns, gender identities, or non-gender conforming, we all are American history. We are all American history. Black History Month was, for me, something I wasn't even aware of growing up. Just by way of introduction, I was born and raised in Jersey City, New Jersey, born and raised in Jersey City, New Jersey. My entire family is from the low country of South Carolina, down by Savannah, Georgia, like in between Savannah, Georgia, and Hilton Head, South Carolina, to give you some tourist markers if folks have been to either of those places. My mother migrated to the north, just how we've seen people migrate from Asia, from Latin America, from parts of Europe, from all over the world. There's been this internal thing that's happened with Black Americans for decades. We call it the Great Migration at its peak. And my mother was part of that wave of people who moved to places like New York and New Jersey, or out to California or to Chicago, other parts of the Midwest, looking for a better life, a better opportunity. My mother only was able to get a grade school education. She came from poverty. So I don't take for granted, Jamal and Jesse, that I have 16 books. I don't take for granted that I'm Grammy nominated. I don't take for granted that I have my own businesses, and I've been blessed to see all 50 states in this country and 5 of the 7 continents, because I come from poverty. I come from, generations of folks who suffered and struggled financially. A lot of it due to the systemic racism that they had to deal with and the classism they had to deal with as poor people. My mother only had an 8th grade education, but she instilled in me early on, y'all. And this is important to say when we think about Black history or any history. Yeah, we can focus on famous people in Black history. We can talk about Angela Davis or Dr. King or Malcolm X or Fannie Lou Hamer, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, people like that. But, honestly, and Jamal knows this, is people like his fathers, people like my mother, who are living, breathing history as far as I'm concerned. And they're just as important, as those famous folks, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the honestly, the sweat and struggles of my mother to make sure that her son got a quality education in spite of the circumstances that we were living under. Didn't know my father, only saw him 2 or 3 times until I was 8 years old. My mother and father were never married. He cut us off when I was 8, literally told my mother that I was not his son. But 8 was also significant, even though that was a painful moment at age 8. It was also the year that my mother took me to the library for the first time, and I fell in love with books, which is how I ended up becoming a writer, because I just love reading so much. And so I just wanted to kind of give that background, because when we think about Black history, I think or any history, any people's history, it's important to make the stories personal. And, I grew up loving reading and loving history, but the reason why Black History Month is important, which was founded by Carter G. Woodson as Negro History Week in 1926, almost 100 years ago. And why did he pick February? Because two people born in February were instrumental to Black history, to Black people. One was Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States, and the other was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, who was the product of a white man and a Black woman born into slavery, and he taught himself how to read and write as a young person and escaped from slavery, and actually became probably the most photographed person of the 1800s, even more so than Lincoln, and the most incredible orator, speaker that we had ever had up until that point in American history. And we still cite his speeches to this day. And so that's why February was designated. And by 1976, it had evolved into a full month, Black History Month. That's how it happened. And that was a result of the civil rights movement, as we should know, as folks who, this is basic American history. The civil rights movement was from 1955 to 1968. I didn't know any of this growing up. I didn't know any of it. I didn't know that Black people could be writers. I didn't know about Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, the civil rights movement. Even though I was born right after the civil rights movement or in the midst of it all, I had no idea about any of this, because it was left out of my education, which is why it hurts my heart in 2024, after all the struggles we've gone through, to get things inserted into the education, not to make anyone feel bad, not to make anyone feel guilty, but no matter how you identify yourself, no matter what your identities are, you should see yourself in science, in math, in technology, in English, in history, in social studies, and, no matter what the subject matter may be. And I simply did not. And only because of a financial aid package that got me to college, Rutgers University, New Jersey, was I able to begin to take classes about the Harlem Renaissance, was able to take classes about the Negritude movement, where I learned about Black writers, not just from America, but from the West Indies, from Africa, from different parts of the world. And that's when I finally said to myself, I can do this, because I finally saw myself as a writer in other people. So that's why Black History Month is important. It's the same thing with Women's History Month. A month from now, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I only learned Betsy Ross Soda Flag. I learned vaguely about Florence Nightingale, vaguely about Helen Keller, vaguely about Rosa Parks not giving up her seat on the bus. And that was the totality of what I learned about the contributions of women and girls in my entire education, K through 12. And then we wonder why things like sexism, misogyny, or as the Barbie film calls it, the patriarchy exists globally, worldwide. We wonder why, to this day, women still oftentimes will do the same work as men and make less money than men. We can go through all those different things, but those are the things that I didn't know growing up. And so when we see people attempting to squash diversity, equity, and inclusion, squash these months, squash even these affinity groups, what they're saying is that we don't want to see you. We don't think your history is valid. We don't think that your humanity is valid. And we have to challenge that with love always, but we have to say no. Black History Month matters. Women's History Month matters. Pride Month matters. Celebrating Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and Indigenous people and disabled people and all people matters, no matter what their identities are. All of us are equals. And so for me, Jamal and Jesse, I'm really thankful that you all are even doing this kind of program, because it helps to have these kind of conversations, especially given how polarizing our society is and this world is right now, with so many people fighting each other around their differences. And you all know what I'm talking about. I think that, we have to ask ourselves in 2024, and I've been thinking about this a lot, Jesse and Jamal and everyone, do we want a world that's rooted in fear, division, violence, and hatred? Or do we want a world where we are courageous enough to be bridge builders, where we believe in love, where we believe in kindness and empathy and compassion for each other, and also have the courage to have very necessary, even if they're uncomfortable, conversations about who we are, where we came from, and how we can go forward as a human race, as a people. Because I'm gonna tell you, all this craziness we see out here, all the violence we see out here, and as I said to Jamal in the text before we started, I literally have been on the road. I've done about 30 speeches between Dr. King speeches early January, the first week of January. I'm going to be going right into mid-March, all over this country. And, the conversations have been profound virtually and in person. And people are looking for some hope. And I think that we have a responsibility in 2024, those of us who are alive right now, because people are going to look at us 10 years from now, 25 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, Jesse, Jamal, all of you. And they're going to ask, when you saw all this racism, all this sexism, all this classism, this ageism, this ableism, the anti-Semitism, the Islamophobia, all the hatred in different forms, the disrespect and hatred of immigrants or migrant people, quote unquote, what did you say and what did you do? To challenge this, the homophobia, the transphobia, all of it. What did you do? What did you say to challenge this? Because as Audre Lorde, one of our great Black writers, said that basically our silence will not save us. Our silence will not save us. And so we need people in corporate America, in academia, in education, in these nonprofit organizations I've done talks with as well, in our communities, everywhere. No one's saying you got to be out there protesting and marching and rallying, things like that. But these kind of conversations are absolutely critical because otherwise people are just allowed to go forward with some ideas that I think are doing great damage to us as human beings and to our spirits. And so I want to just put that out there. I'm open to questions and dialogue, Jamal, whenever you want to jump in. But, love, y'all, love. And if we really love ourselves and we really know ourselves, for me in college is where I got to absorb Black history. I discovered the E185 section of the library where all the Black books were. It gave me a pride in who I was, and it taught me that my people were more than just enslaved people, that we had a whole history of building ancient, incredible civilizations. It taught me about who we were, not just in America, but as I said earlier, around the world, be it the West Indies, Africa, Canada, Black Brits, everywhere. It also made it clear to me what was possible with my own life if I could go explore Langston Hughes and what he did as a writer, what Zora Neale Hurston did as a writer, what Nikki Giovanni and Maya Angelou did as writers, that I could do it too. And then I've tried to pass that on to other people, just like Harriet Tubman was free, but she kept going back to free other enslaved people because she wanted to pass on that gift of freedom, that gift of being someone who understood that they deserved an opportunity to have an opportunity at life. And that's really what it's about. So if we really care about people, not just our own particular identity or identities of people, but also all people, then we should want everyone to have an opportunity to have an opportunity. So that's what I think about when I think about DEI, when I think about Black history, when I think about my own personal journey. And I think about, more than ever, we've got to change the direction of things because there are forces that are attempting to take us far, far backwards, far, far backwards. And what I've been saying to people, Jesse and Jamal, a lot in these speeches the last couple of months is it's not about just, if you're a liberal or progressive or conservative, it's not about Democrat or Republican or blue state, red state. Those are boxes, those are labels that people conveniently put themselves in. What I'm talking about now more than ever is what kind of human being do you want to be? What kind of human being do you want to be? And if you really care about, humanity, what are you doing to try to preserve humanity? And that's for all of us. That's for all of us. And I am certainly proud to be a Black person, certainly proud to be an African person. I'm very clear that I'm an African person, a Black person, but I also belong to the human family, the human race. And so if someone is suffering, I have a responsibility to respond to that. I don't care what their background or identities are. I'm a heterosexual, cisgender, so-called straight male, Black male, but my wife and I both are like, we can't support things like sexism, homophobia, transphobia, any kind of ism or phobia that hurts other people. I can't just stand in my own space, my own little male privilege and not act like, sexism doesn't affect half the world's population when it does, when women and girls are being hurt every single day just because they're women and girls. And so that's what I think about when I think about DEI, and to shut down these conversations, to shut down these spaces is to say that we don't really care about the humanity of all people. And we have to resist that. And that's what this is about to me, with love, but we have to resist it.
Thank you for that, Kev. And you already obliterated the vast majority of my questions just to jump out there. But you talked about Black History Month in general, just to go back a touch to say that, it's American history, along with other recognition months and days that we acknowledge, and some more than others. And we'll get to sort of the corporate spaces and the global attacks on DEI. But I'm wondering from you what you think the biggest misconception about Black History Month is, right? Because it feels like, as we should know and understand, that it is American history and it's how the country was shaped, good, bad, indifferent, and everything in between. But what do you think the biggest misconception about recognizing who we are is, particularly in spaces where they're not necessarily willing, let alone able to acknowledge and appreciate us as a people?
The biggest misconception is that Black people haven't contributed anything to America. That's the biggest misconception. You can't even talk about the economic infrastructure of America without talking about the free labor for 246 years at least of Black people helping to build this country. You can't talk about schools like Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, where I visited just a couple of weeks ago, which was built on the backs of this free labor. Rutgers University, I went to school, which was founded in 1766, has admitted it. Harvard University has admitted it. Georgetown University has admitted it. Many of the major insurance companies have admitted that if you go back and dig through their history of insurance companies, it was built on the backs of free labor. Wall Street, the stock exchange. Well, what were the first stocks that were exchanged? Black people, human beings. That's where the terminology came from. And so it's so many different places. A lot of times we'll reduce it to, well, there's music. Yeah, of course there's music. Spirituals, Phil Hollers, blues, jazz, rock and roll, soul, hip hop, all Black music, country music, country music, country music. People up in arms about Beyonce making a country album. Well, guess what? The first country music artists were actually Black people. That's well documented. If you go back 100 years, there was something called jug bands in the 1920s and 1930s. Those were Black musicians who were making music rooted in country music. And so it's important to know history. It's important to know history. You can't talk about American food, certain American cuisine is rooted in Black folks, because who was preparing the food on those plantations? It was Black people. It was Black people. Who were the first people to win the Kentucky Derby, in the 1800s? It was Black people, because who worked with the animals on those plantations? Who worked with the horses the most? Black people. And so if you look at all of this history, you can't deny that we've been a part of every aspect of it. Even when you talk about democracy, American democracy, the conversations that were happening around the Constitution in America, the fact that even in the Constitution, there was a struggle around, do we acknowledge that these Black people exist? Well, they acknowledged us as 3/5 of a human being, which led to this, led to a conversation almost a 50, 60, 70 years later, which was called the Civil War. That was a whole nother conversation than the Civil Rights Movement. So when you look at the so-called founding of this country, the Civil War, and the Civil Rights Movement, three incredible moments where this was a struggle around democracy. Who was at the center of the conversation each time? Black people. Black people. If you turn on an electric light, you might think of Thomas Edison, but there was a Black man who worked with Thomas Edison named Lewis Latimer. The next time you get in a car and you stop at a traffic light, guess what? It was a Black man named Garrett Morgan who created the traffic light. We can go on and on and on and on, about the contributions of Black people to America. And it's rich and it's layered. And many people simply don't have any idea. And what I say to people, Jamal, there's nothing wrong with being ignorant. I'm ignorant of many things. It just means that we don't know something. But there is something wrong with being what I call enthusiastically ignorant, where not only do you not know something, you don't want to know it, and you're fighting tooth and nail to make sure that you don't know it and other people don't know it. That's what we see with the banning of books. That's what we're seeing of the erasing of history and the lies that somehow this is going to make people feel bad. I do speeches about history with groups of all backgrounds all the time. No one walks away from there feeling bad. No one walks from there saying you made me feel guilty. No one walks away saying you've made me feel like I'm totally responsible for everything that's happened. No, what people say often, thank you for that information. I did not know that.
Thank you for that. And as we sort of think about what all of this means to tech,
Yeah.
right? The larger implications considering the uptick in DEI criticism. You touched on this in your opening, but I think if you could expand on what that conversation looks like when we are trying to make sure that programs, initiatives are necessities and priorities and not just afterthoughts and hobbies, right? What does that look like in the face of companies that are slashing DEI focused budgets, you
Hmm.
know,
Well,
letting go of DEI teams altogether, and then the justifications for it publicly are just, overall budget cuts, even though we that do this work know and understand what that means. So if you could sort of speak to why not only DEI is a necessity and a priority, but what do we say in terms of growth when there's so much pushback on the other way?
Well, I think my first response is tying it back to Black History in this month. If you all just do a simple Google church search, pardon me, of it could be church too, a search of Black inventors in American history, you will see a long line of Black folks who have been involved in what is now known as technology from the very beginning. We've always been involved in something innovative along with other people. And so I mean, again, Benjamin Banneker was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. Look him up. Who was he? What was he inventing? What was he doing? What was his role in tech during that time? Who was Lewis Latimer? What was his role in technology, as we call it now, in his time? And so I think, one, we do a disservice to our history as a people in this country and in this world by acting as if some folks have never been involved in innovation, technological innovation, helping to move our society forward. I just need to say that. And then on a real practical level, if we talk about a company's bottom line, if you just go on social media, you can see the incredible use of technology by people of color, by Black people, by women, by all different types of groups of people, by pushing them out of tech, by pushing them out of getting rid of DEI programs. We're saying we don't even want them as consumers. That actually affects your bottom line, in my humble opinion. And I think at the end of the day, don't you want your company to be about the bottom line? Don't we want to make sure customers feel like they're welcome and they're safe in these spaces? That just makes common practical business sense to me to do that. And then, it's like we're everywhere. I mean, technology affects all of us. I'm literally on a laptop talking to all of you, and I got my iPhone right next to me, and I'm plugged in all over the place. And so clearly, technology drives everything that we do. That means all of us. That means all of us. And we can ill afford to participate in technology racism. We shouldn't even be pushing forth technology racism unwittingly by saying, well, we don't need these DEI programs, and this particular community really matter. Yeah, we all matter. We all matter. We all matter. And so I think that's the challenge for us, is figuring out ways to embrace it and make sure that we're voices at the table, that we actually have real roles and leadership roles that are respected and honored, and that we can be heard, because otherwise we are just participating. Thank you for posting about Black inventors, Jesse. We are participating unwittingly, even in the tech world, in the kind of systemic racism that has often driven other industries that have pushed people out or kept people out completely.
Thank you for that. And selfishly, I just wanted to call out the work that we do is really hard and it's rather thankless, but to say that it isn't necessary and paramount to the existence of not just tech, but who we are as a people and the
Yeah,
ability to show up, no matter who we are, and being as authentic as we can be, that's not only super important, but that's something that we cannot opt out of as a people, right? We can't just tap out of who we are. And so to have these conversations ongoing in the name of programming, it's really important to not only uplift, but just sustain in a way that is, tangible, considering who is buying or who the end users of the products and who's building the technology and the algorithms. And as we move into this AI universe, it's important to be mindful of that, because as much as the world is going to be automated, we as humans still have to navigate through it. And that's from, the folks that are responsible for building it, putting together the algorithm, all the way down to selling it, right? And so I think thinking about our end users from end to thinking about the whole process from end to end is going to be helpful in terms of how we move about in the future.
I agree. I agree. And I just need to say this back to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to DEI. You know, if you think, and I'm saying you in general, no matter who you are, whether you're watching this live now or will watch the video of this later, think that Black History program is only for Black people, or just only a few non-Black people show up, that's a problem. If when you get to Women's History Month next month, and most of the people who show up for the program are only women, that's a problem. We get to Pride in June, and only folks who show up are folks who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, non-gender conforming, plus, and straight, so-called straight folks don't show up. Cisgender folks don't show up. That's a problem. Same thing with Asian American, Pacific Islander celebrations, Latinx, Hispanic Heritage Month celebrations. That's part of the problem. The challenge is that people keep thinking, I can't learn anything in that space. That's not for me. That's why you see things like DEI being challenged and getting pushed out, or people saying we don't need this any longer, because there's ignorance because people are not even participating in things where they could actually learn. I make it a point to always show up for some, as a man, I'm like, I got to show up at Women's History Month programs. As a straight man, I got to show up at Pride programs. I got to show up at these spaces because, one, I'm a real ally. I believe in real allyship, but I also believe that I have a responsibility for the rest of my life to learn. The rest of my life to learn. And so I think about that. I just want to drop that in there, Jamal, because I think that's really important to say, as well, because a lot of times we'll see the programs and people think it's not for them, or they're afraid, to even to just sit there, even if it's quietly. I'm like, we have to be willing to have necessary conversations, even if it sometimes makes us comfortable. Otherwise, we don't grow as human beings. We just don't grow. And that's the problem that we're dealing with in the world today.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And at this time, I'm wondering if there's anyone that has a question for Kevin. I know there's a lot of information and a lot of insight and a lot of perspective, but I'd love to hear, and I would imagine Kevin would too, to hear from some of you all in terms of what you think about the conversation, about all things DEI, and even to pose the question of what Black History Month means to you after what you just heard.
And if I could echo, if folks can just, if you can, please turn on your cameras. I would love to see you all because I see a lot of photos. I'd love to see, hey, Patrick, hey, Lauren, hey, Belto, hey, Latanya. I'd love to see faces. Actually, eyes blinking would be wonderful.
That's
And
fun.
I'm drinking water, so y'all know what it is that I'm drinking out of this green bottle. I don't drink liquor, no judgment anyone else, but this is definitely water. Just making
It's
that clear.
also 8:34 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Yes.
Jesse has his
It's
hand
early
raised.
here.
Yeah, so Kevin, thanks again for introduction. And again, congrats on all your accolades and everything you
Thank
do for
you.
the community.
Thank you
And
so much.
again, for joining us again. I think you made a lot of great points. One of the last point in terms of making sure that we basically join each other's communities, right? I think that was a really good call out and making sure, because we have basically like 9 different ERGs, and participating across those different ERGs, I think is a very good call out. Because you don't have to necessarily identify as one of those ERGs, but being an ally and supporting it. Also, too, there's always growth to be had, right? So
Yeah.
thank you for making that call out. To Jamal's other question was one of my questions as well. How has, and you touched on this a little bit, how is your involvement in education, how you teach your kids, or like think about Black History Month, how has that evolved from when you were in, say, high school versus the man that you are right now, right? And
Wow. It was non-existent when I was in high school. I didn't even know what Black History was, Juneteenth, any of that stuff. I just, like I said, my wonderful educational system where I was an A student, K through 12, taught us nothing. I think we got 2 paragraphs about, Black people being slaves, enslaved people. That was it. Jackie Robinson, maybe, George Washington Carver. I just thought he was some Black dude that experimented with peanuts. I was like, okay, that because no one articulated that he was an amazing inventor. That's one of the inventors we should look up. George Washington Carver. Who was he? What was he doing in his lab at Tuskegee University, back then Tuskegee Institute? I just didn't know. How has it evolved? I had to do a deep dive into my own history. I had to do a deep dive first into my own history, and really go from, honestly, Jesse, from self-hatred, profound self-hatred and low self-esteem, to self-love and self-respect. One of the things I admire about my wife greatly is that she had 2 parents, 2 Black parents, who taught her in the home Black history. They made sure that she and her sister and brother learned it. It makes a huge difference, because she's like, I never had the kind of doubts that you had, because I was learning early on we matter and we exist in all these different places in history. And so how's it affected me through the years? I had to learn it for myself. And then I had a responsibility, I felt, and I still feel that way, to share that history with other people. And I see the eyes light up when I, especially, I mean, it doesn't matter the age or the generation of folks, but especially when I'm talking to, high school young people or college young people, and you can see they're where I were, where they're like, wow, I didn't know that. How did I not know this information? How's it shifted for me? At the beginnings, I didn't say that Black history was American history, but it's inextricably linked. You can't separate the two. You cannot separate the two. How did it shift for me over time, Jesse? I began to say, you know what? I need to also learn about Asian people. I need to learn about Latinx people. I need to learn about indigenous people. I need to learn about Italian people, about Jewish people, about Polish people. I need to learn about queer folks. I need to learn about differently able, disabled folks. I need to learn about all these different types of groups. Let me make sure I'm always learning. Even when I travel outside the country, I don't travel as a tourist. I travel as someone who's like, I want to be a part of this community. I've been to places like Ireland as a Black dude, to Japan as a Black dude from America, and I'm like absorbing Irish culture. I'm absorbing, Japanese culture. I'm in Jamaica in the West Indies. I'm absorbing Jamaican culture, West Indian culture. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
it's when I was in Africa, I'm like, oh man, when being in Nigeria where they speak over 400 languages was mind blowing to me. You know what I mean? So I just think we should be lifelong learners. We should be lifelong learners. And that's how I've evolved it. It started with me wanting to learn my own history, and it evolved in over time to like learn for the rest of your life about yourself and about other people, and be a bridge builder, not a bridge destroyer. Work to be a bridge builder, not a bridge destroyer. That's the basis to me, Jamal and Jesse, of DEI. Be a bridge builder. That's what it's about.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Kev, you just sort of went towards my next question when I was thinking about the global implications of Black History Month. We're a global company. Black history is a global phenomenon, right? It's not just celebrated here in the States. What would you say globally is something that we can learn from here in the States about our education systems, about how we approach acknowledgement and recognition month, right? Because there's some countries that celebrate Black history in other times of the year. Many don't celebrate at all. Many on the continent, they don't have any sort of reference to what this looks like because they're living it every day much more fully, right? So what would you say globally is something that here in the States folks can take away from experiences worldwide?
Wow. That y'all are asking wonderful questions. I want to go back to 2013. I was asked, this is when President Obama was in the White House. I was asked by our government, the State Department, to be the official speaker to go to Japan to give a series of lectures on the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. I said yes because it was a free trip to Japan, of course, first and foremost, which was the most amazing country I've ever been in. You talk about technology and innovation. I mean, Japan was next level. If you've never been, you must go. You must go. And it was deep for me because here I was in a country where I constantly met folks who were Japanese who knew as much, if not more, about Black history and American history than people in America. That blew my mind, y'all. That blew my mind. There was African American studies departments at Japanese universities and colleges. That blew my mind. And I think what it did for me, that experience, and there's another experience I'm going to share in a second, Jamal, is that, we in America are so busy trying to ban books and stop DEI programs and get rid of Black History Month in classrooms, and not realizing the impact that Black people have had on America, that it has resonated all across the world. Just think about hip hop. Hip hop just turned 50 years old. This culture that was created by African Americans, West Indians, and Latinx folks together in New York City is a global. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. The other example I want to give, you talk about how to teach Black history. I also had the honor, Jamal and Jesse and everyone, to be in the country of Wales, which is a part of the United Kingdom. There's Wales, there's Northern Ireland, there's England and Scotland. We're also not really taught that. We're just taught England. I'm in Wales to celebrate the 100th birthday of Dylan Thomas, who was for the country of Wales, like Langston Hughes, what Langston Hughes means to us in Black America. And I was the ambassador for this. This is about a year after I went to Japan. And as I'm traveling around Wales, I'm noticing that there's signs in English and there's signs in Welsh. And so I finally asked, out of curiosity, why do you all have signs in English and Welsh? You know what they said to me? to your question, Jamal, they said when y'all, Black people in America, were fighting the civil rights movement, 1955 to 1968, it had such a profound effect on us as Welsh people who were struggling with our own identity vis-a-vis the English, that we decided we wanted to fight just the way y'all were fighting. That blew my mind. I said, you telling me that you studied Black history in America and that impacted how you move as Welsh people in Wales? And the answer was yes. And so, when we think about these things, when we try to suppress our people in our country or suppress their history, suppress opportunities that expose the world to the genius that comes out of certain communities, we don't even realize that those communities overseas are still getting that information. You know what I mean? And they're asking, well, why is it? Because the Japanese asked me some very deep questions about America. The Welsh asked me some very deep questions about America. I was just in Vancouver, Canada. Last thing I'll say, a week ago, I had to give a Black History Month speech to a boys' school that is 99% young white males. And 750 to 800 young white males sat there and they listened and they digested the information. There was no fighting, no, how dare you say these things? No. And I was able to share with them what I knew about the history of Black people coming to Vancouver from places like California in the 1800s. You know what I mean? Because I made it a point to do my own research about Black history in Vancouver, Canada, and Canada in general. And so it was actually an exchange. When we don't allow that history to be put out there, we're saying we don't even want people to dialogue with each other and see what they actually might have in common. Who knew that I had something in common with the Welsh? Who knew that I had something when I was in common with the Irish when I went to Ireland? The struggles that they were dealing with as well. But if we don't have those conversations, and if we don't hashtag, as I always say, Jamal and Jesse, if we don't hashtag read, study, travel, hashtag read, study, travel, hashtag read, study, travel, then we're just saying we're good with living in a box where we don't, not only do we not know our own history, we don't know any history at all. We just start making stuff up. And that's what you see a lot of times. People just making stuff up, making stuff up. No facts, no research, nothing, just making stuff up.
So I suspect, based on what I've heard globally, that has to inspire you in the
Oh,
face
yeah.
of what's going on here in the States. But my next question was essentially, what inspires you and what inspires your work? And I think about everything that I've heard today and what I know of you, it just seems like, wait, DEI is not dead. Um,
No.
Reading and studying and traveling, that will never die in terms of the need to do that, to expand. But what inspires you?
People. I love people. I say it all the time to my wife. I love people. I love all people. I love all people. I love all people. Even the people who piss me off, even the people that I know may even hate me or my people, Black people, I'm not participating in that. I'm participating in love. I'm participating in dialogue. I was at a school after the Vancouver, Canada stop. I was at a school in Seattle, Washington last week as well. And there was a couple of conversations that were very contentious. And there was two young men in particular, two heterosexual males who are flexing their egos, what I'm saying, their muscles, they thought. And I had to challenge them because they clearly did not hashtag read, nor study, nor travel, was just speaking off raw emotions. And there was stuff that they did not want to deal with, like racism, like sexism, like homophobia and transphobia. And so they were trying to figure out any way they could to come at me. And I just went, I was polite, but I just said, no, that's not real. Where'd you get that information from? And I think that's the question we have to start asking. What inspires me? People, but what also inspires me, Jamal, is people who are willing to do the work, are willing to do the work. If I could sit here, I literally, to my left are books. In my bag are books. On my phone are constant apps, all kinds of news apps and informational apps and things like that. In addition to all the sports apps I have, because I'm a big sports fan. You know what I mean? But I'm like, if I can make sure every single day I read, if I can make sure every single day I'm thinking about things critically, we have to become critical thinkers, critical thinkers. And if you don't hashtag read, study, travel, you will not be a critical thinker. I don't care how successful you are. I don't care how many college degrees you have. I don't care what your salary is, what your benefits is, your retirement plan, all of that. We need people who are actually thinkers. You know what I'm saying? People who are thinkers. And so, what inspires me, people who are thinkers, no matter what generation, what age they are. And what inspires me especially are young people who actually are trying to figure this stuff out. You know what I mean? And I'm talking about folks who are under 40, under 35, under 30. You know, I've had incredible conversations, and I don't do speeches where I talk at young people. I'm like, here's a few things I'm thinking. What are y'all thinking? What are you feeling? You know what I'm saying? And it's rich. And so, you know, we just have to, what inspires me are the possibilities of what we can be. You know, the civil rights movement is a snapshot of what we can be. It was an incredible period, even with all the hardship and the loss of life, like Malcolm X and Dr. King and Medgar Evers and other people. It was also about possibilities, you know what I'm saying? And we got to get back to that, because there's forces that don't want that. And I've seen, you know, like, you know, when George Floyd was killed in 2020, and you saw this rainbow coalition of people in this country and around the world coming out saying, this is unacceptable that this Black man could be killed, literally kneed to death for over 9 minutes while it's being videotaped. And, you know, it was an outpouring, but it has to be consistent. You know, it has to be consistent because the hate has been consistent. And so what I'm saying, what gives me hope, is if we can get back to where the love and the do something ism becomes consistent. Because I'm sitting here as your guest speaker. I literally went to college because of a program that was created in the 1960s for poor kids like me in my home state of New Jersey, so we could be first generation college students. Why was that program created? Because of the civil rights movement.
Thank you for sharing that. Jensen, you have a question.
Hey, Jensen.
Hey everyone, and thanks again so much, Kevin, for coming here. It's really an honor to be able to meet you,
My
and
honor, sir.
you know,
My honor.
see you on screen and on this Zoom screen and not my TV screen.
I
But
know a little something about that.
yeah, but I did have a question. You know, you talked about education, and you talked about how the first time you really learned about Black history, or like piece of our own history, was in college, and I had the same experience. And you also
Where'd you
talked
go to
about
school? Where'd you go to school?
Amherst College,
Oh,
in
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And so I had a similar experience as well, where I only really learned about the intricacies of, you know, slavery, not just in the United States, but in the Caribbean, through courses there.
Yeah.
And that kind of led through, you know, through the decades. You also talked about people not really either doing the work or being educated, and so people just making stuff up, right? And it's important for us to say, you know, to do the work, educate ourselves. And I feel like a lot of people do say that, but when it comes to our history and how much of it we not just aren't taught, we're not exposed to, we don't know what we don't know. When it's, to me, when I hear people say, oh, do the work to educate yourself, what does that even mean when you don't even know where to start? You don't know what resource to go to. You don't know, you know, where to learn certain things. You don't know that, you know, the civil rights movement didn't start in the 50s and 60s. It started with a host of Black women in the 40s. You don't really know that unless you are exposed to very niche amounts of knowledge. I mean, I didn't even know that essentially all Black people in the diaspora in the Western Hemisphere came from essentially the Gold Coast, West Africa, Ghana, modern day Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, all those countries, and not, for example, like Egypt, which is what a lot of folks have talked about over the last several, you know, probably 60 years. And because the slave trade was concentrated on the coast in those places, I didn't know that until I went to Ghana, went to the slave castles in Accra. I would have never known that to this day. And so when we talk about educating ourselves, are there any resources that you have come across that you like to, you know, recommend to people that could serve as kind of like a syllabus or like a rubric to kind of go through different topics? And it's not just history of where we came from, but also history of the struggles, the political struggles that we went through, cultural things that we went through over the past several hundred years that could give us a even richer understanding of where we are today.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that, Jensen. I really appreciate you so much for sharing that. A book by Lerone Bennett called Before the Mayflower, Lerone Bennett. I would suggest people start there. It's one of the first history books I read that was an effort to fill out the narrative of the history of America, if you will. And I think it's tremendously important. He purposely starts in Africa and he makes his way to this part of the world. You know, I think we have to be willing to read history books. We got to stop saying, oh, it's boring, da, da, da. we have to say, you know what, I need to learn this, like you said. And I think something that stuck out to me, two words stuck out to me as you were speaking, Jensen, we have to be intellectually curious. We have to be intellectually curious. We have to be intellectually curious for the rest of our lives. I realized early on when I was 18, 19 years old, when I was in college, listen, my two best friends were from Trinidad and Tobago, and the other brother was from Barbados. And so as I was learning African American history, I also made it a point to learn West Indian history. You know what I'm saying? I was like, I need to learn West Indian history as well. I mean, I'm from the New York, New Jersey area. One out of two Black folks are from the West Indies. At least one parent may be from the West Indies. And so you're going to meet folks who are Trini and Guyanese and Bajan and, from all over the Caribbean, folks who are Puerto Rican, who are Dominican, who are Haitian. I better learn something about these parts of this part of the world as well. You know what I mean? And so that was my intellectual curiosity. And once that switch is turned on, like a light switch, it should never be turned off again. You know what I mean? And so for me, it's just been constantly learning. What else can I do? Like you, I've been to Africa a couple of times, and I was like, well, I'm here. Let me understand what this means. Where did my wife and I take our honeymoon? In Africa, Cape Verde, and we saw literally the spot where, as we were being brought from places like Ghana, where you were, Jensen, Cape Verde was like the last spot. Here's the slave market right here. Here's where they're gonna be divided. Here's where the folks are going to Brazil. These folks are going to Jamaica. These folks are going to South Carolina, where my family's from. You know what I'm saying? It was profound experience. So I think that we have to, before the Mayflower, Eyes on the Prize, Eyes on the Prize, Eyes on the Prize, the 14, 15-part documentary series about the history of the Civil Rights Movement, Eyes on the Prize. It's on YouTube for free, y'all. A lot of stuff is on YouTube for free. We should watch it. We should watch it. We should watch it. I think I'm just giving you two examples, between Before the Mayflower as a book and Eyes on the Prize as a documentary series, you will get such an explanation of history. I believe that people, if they digest those two things alone, you'll go out and say, well, I need to learn more, because you'll start looking up stuff. What I would do when I read things like Malcolm X's The Autobiography of Malcolm X, when he referenced things like, who's E. Franklin Frazier? He would mention the sociology. I'm like, let me look up E. Franklin Frazier. You know what I mean? If he mentioned someone else, I'm like, let me look that up as well. Let me listen to their speech. Let me read their speech. Let me read their book. And I think that's how we have to roll. I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we don't do that. And one of the questions I ask young people all the time, I know we just have a few more minutes, Jamal and Jesse, but I need to say this. A lot of folks will say, I don't like to read. Let me give you back to my personal experiences. Remember, I said my mother took me to the library when I was 8 years old. The first books I read, mostly for the first 3 years I was going back and forth to the library, sports books. I'm a big sports fan. I love football history, baseball history, basketball history, just sports history. That gave me my love of reading something that I love, was interested in. And then when I was 11 years old, I started to branch off into other stuff. And so even people who say, well, I don't like to read, in these times, one, we have audiobooks, there's podcasts out there, there's all kinds of stuff that if you don't like to read, or if you have trouble reading, I understand some folks may have trouble reading for different reasons. There's audiobooks, you know what I'm saying? But I also think start with something that you're actually interested in, that you're passionate about. For me, it was sports. And even when I think about sports history, the reason why I know so much about sports history, or Black history or American history, because a lot of it has come through my understanding of sports history, because part of sports history is the elimination of Black people, erasing of Black people from sports history, like the Kentucky Derby back in the day, like professional football, like baseball, like basketball, because there was a time when we weren't even allowed to play these sports. You know what I mean? And so I started connecting dots like, wow, this has been happening in all these spaces, including my beloved sports space.
Thanks for that. And it's funny because the Olympic Games in Mexico City comes to mind in
Yeah.
1960. So that's kind of where I go knee-jerk reaction. We do have one question before we close out. Patrick.
Hey, Patrick, how are you?
Good. Thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed hearing from you today. Just very quickly, I'm a manager, software engineering manager, and it strikes me that the people that need your message are my peers. Because honestly, in management, we don't get this. And I've been, Atlassian is my 6th company that I've managed people at, and I've never had it anywhere. So how do we reach us? How do we reach my peers?
You all take this video that you are recording right now, and as leaders in the company, you share it with your teams. That's what we need to do. And then you have conversations with the teams. What did you feel about what you just heard for the last hour? And I would say to folks, this is a safe space, a non-judgmental space. But are there things here that made you comfortable? Are there things that made you uncomfortable? Are there things that you did not know? Are there things that you feel like you need to know now? Let's talk about it. And let's talk about this whole concept of DEI, because I think that's part of the challenge. That's what a good ally means. Like for me, for example, Patrick, again, I'm a man. I'm a heterosexual man. I can't just have conversations with, women or queer folks about sexism or homophobia, transphobia. Most of my work actually needs to be with straight men, like, because straight men oftentimes don't have these conversations about sexism or homophobia, transphobia. Do you know what I mean? And so that's my responsibility, to find the resources that we need, and make sure that people have it. This is a resource that we just created in this conversation for an hour that can be used. Ain't nobody up in here cursing, screaming. We ain't name calling. I've used the word love several times. I've said several times that I love all people. I don't know how this is not digestible for most people. You know what I mean, Brother Patrick? And I think that use this tool. Jesse and Jamal, this team has created a tool, that I think can be very useful for the entire company, but we've got to be willing to press the button and say, hey, y'all, we need to watch this, and then come back and have a conversation about it.
Thank you for answering. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. And Jensen, yes, A People's History in the United States, Howard Zinn, a Jewish brother, a white brother, a Jewish brother, Howard Zinn, was teaching at a Black college in the South in the 1960s, realized as the civil rights movement was happening all around him, that, hey, you know what? I not only need to learn this history, but other people need to learn this history as well, which is my point to Patrick a moment ago, Brother Patrick. Howard Zinn, a white brother, a Jewish brother, teaching at a Black college in the South in the 1960s, that became the basis of A People's History in the United States. That's where it came from, Jensen. He decided, I want to be an ally. This is how I can become an ally, because I need to share this history that people don't know with other people.
Thanks so much. And we're going to take one more question. But to Patrick's question, I'll just say we're definitely going to crowdsource a ton of resources, send out the recording, do a recap blog that can be shared much more widely in the realm of all the programming that we've had over the last month, sponsored by the Black Atlassian group. So I will certainly do that. Belto.
Yeah, first of all,
Hey,
thank you,
Belto.
Kevin, for joining. I really appreciate the talks. So my question is I'm sure in your research and reading, you've probably dove into archives that aren't necessarily pleasant in terms of the experiences Black people experienced. So I have a particular interest in transatlantic slave trade and the history behind that. I have a natural bias being from the Caribbean.
What country, please?
Saint Martin, divided French and Dutch
Yes.
territory. So I'm from the French side.
Yes, sir.
When you dive deep enough, you start to find disturbing content every now and then.
Yeah.
And I find myself, like, when I'm looking at the transatlantic slave trade, for example, where sometimes I just need to take a break from reading all this content. Otherwise, I might walk in the street and just slap somebody. How do you just navigate consuming all of this type of content and just not letting it get to you, or rather altering your viewpoint on, as you said, you love all humans, no matter size or color or shape. But sometimes, it can make you see things differently.
I think it's a natural human emotion, and we should not deny our humanity. Sometimes we are going to be angry. We have a right to that anger. Sometimes we're going to feel hurt. Sometimes we're going to feel great sadness. I want to be a whole human being, just like you want to be, which is why you're doing this deep dive, this historical dive. One of my most incredible experiences in my life, Belto, was going to the only international slavery museum that exists, as you probably know, in the world, in Liverpool, England. And it blew my mind, because it literally captured everything, what I'm saying, as I walked through it. And you could feel the spirit of our ancestors in that space. And certainly I felt anger, I felt hurt, I felt sadness. And I said, man, look at what my people have gone through for centuries. And, I'm not going to allow anyone to tell me that I should not know my history, just like I would not deny anyone else the right to know their history, but I think, for me, this is where my spiritual practices come in. This is not about organized religion. I'm a Christian. That's my organized religion. But spiritually, what I mean is, what do I do every day to make sure my spirit is good? My prayers, my meditations, the exercise that I do, so that I don't completely lose my mind by digesting all this information on a regular basis. This is why I have, a love affair with sports, for example. I just need some outs sometimes to just kind of balance it out. Why I love stand-up comedy, why I love movies, why I love musicals, I just need to have something that balances out all the things that I think about and feel on a regular basis. So I just don't, like, oh my God, I'm just walking around in a perpetual state of raw emotion, no matter what that raw emotion may be. Does that make sense? And this is why I go to therapy, quite frankly. This is where I go to therapy on a regular basis. This is why I have circles of people, that I can talk with about these things, like my wife and other friends, and like Jamal, other people that I can have. Hey, how do you feel about this? And we can just share. We have safe spaces where we can talk privately about some of the things that we have to deal with. And I think any group of people deserve a right to have that. How are you feeling? How are you doing? The thing I had to learn, Belto, I'm speaking for myself only. I'm an only child. I naturally am an introvert, even though I've learned to be an extrovert, or an ambivert, as I've learned the new word, someone who's a combination of introvert and extrovert. And I also had to learn how to find communities of people we don't have to agree on everything, but we were like-minded in certain ways where we can just share with each other, so we know that we're not tripping by thinking all the things we're thinking and feeling all the things that we're feeling. But we do know to yes, do what Jesse just said. Found you out. He says he prays, he works out, he hangs out with friends, not to allow the stresses of this world to bring me down. Jesse just said it better than I could say it. That's it. Thank you, Jesse. Create your communities. Thank you, Jesse. That's it. That's for all of us, no matter who we are. Who are your people? As we say, who's your tribe? Who are your people? You know what I mean?
I think we're gonna. I
John
think
Yak, I'm good if y'all are good. I can go a couple more seconds.
I can take one more. So if anybody has to
Hey,
jump, like,
Hey,
feel
John
free.
Yak.
Yeah, we want to make sure everyone just gets a chance. So I will definitely stay on. And we'll definitely send out all the info and the recording of the call. So thank you all for joining us. And we'll go to John for the very last question.
Well, thank you guys for allowing me to ask this question. So I was born in Sudan,
Wow.
and I grew up in Kenya in a refugee camp. I was born during a war in Kenya, in Sudan. So going to school in Africa, there was barely any education about slave trade. There was any availability or any sort of student learning about, because I went to school till high school in Africa. I did not learn about African American or even the slave trade itself when I was in school until I comes to America and go to school in America. As an educator, as someone who try to educate people about the contribution of Black people, not only in America, but throughout the globe. How are you guys giving that information to Africa? And how are people in Africa receiving this message? Because only thing that we learn is how the struggle in the United States inspired the independence or the movement for people like Kwame Nkrumah,
Right.
Jomo Kenyatta, and all those people, how the struggle in the United States or the struggle for freedom in the United States inspired these leaders to start a revolution that ended in most African countries being independent. So now in the 21st century, and I do go back to Africa every now and then, there is still very, very limited understanding of what Black people are, what their contribution to the global education system, what their contribution to the world itself. How are you guys sending the message back to where this slave trades started and the migration of Black people around the world?
I'm not sure who you mean by you guys, but I can only speak
I mean,
for.
an educator like yourself
Oh,
who
okay, me.
does, yeah.
Okay. Um, I'm connected. I'm connected. I'm connected to the African diaspora. You know, as I've said, I've made it a point to visit Africa, the Caribbean, the West Indies, and I'm here in America, and I'm connected to folks in parts of Europe and Canada, et cetera. And I've always done that since, you know, as you were asking a question, John, I was thinking back to my college years. If you recall earlier, I said that my two best friends were West Indian. One was Trinidadian, one was from Barbados. He was Bayesian. The other part of that experience that I left out is that I spent much time in the graduate student lounge, even though I was an undergrad student. Why? Because most of the African students congregated in the graduate student lounge. And it was the most profound conversation with people from Sudan, from Kenya, from Ghana, from Nigeria, from South Africa, et cetera. And so for me, I've always been rooted in that. And how did I get to that point? Because I know even my fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, I'm a proud member of that fraternity. If you look at only our name is Greek. Everything about us is actually rooted in the Pan-Africanist movement of the early 1900s. The symbols that we use are going back to Africa. And so I realized early on, I need to follow in the footsteps of Marcus Garvey, of W.E.B. Du Bois, of Malcolm X, which is I need to think globally. I need to think about us as a diasporic people, and I need to have these conversations on a regular basis. You better believe inside of my phone, my app, WhatsApp, a lot of the numbers that are here are numbers in Africa, various parts of Africa. And so I have those conversations, and I think we all, you, I, all of us who care about the global Black community, you know, have to make sure, are we connected to the global Black community in some way? I think that's what we need to do. And that's not to, you know, disconnect from other people, but we're saying, hey, know who you are, and we part of this diaspora. And I think if you have an opportunity to do so, I think all of us who live in this part of the world, America, we need to try to make at least one trip in our lifetimes to Africa. Seriously, you know what I mean? And see it for ourselves and have conversations with folks on the ground there. You know, how can I be supportive? How can I help? What can I do? I think it's no coincidence that you see a wave of African Americans who have been moving to Ghana, you know, moving to Senegal, you know, because people want to connect back to this place we call the motherland, that we call home. I'll end it with this, John. When I went to Africa for the first time, you know, over a decade ago, the thing that was most powerful to me was Nigeria, was when I got off the plane and they said, welcome home. I just started crying. I just started crying. You know what I mean? This little Black boy from a ghetto in Jersey City, New Jersey, whose family's from the South, whose family are Geechee Gullah, which is a dialect that I'm sure was held over from our African ancestry, you know, who grew up eating food that I know came from Africa, you know, was told as a grown man coming back as an author, a writer, an activist, welcome home. It was the most life-changing experience of, I can't even, it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And so I think we have to see it with those eyes, which is, these are my people, no matter where I go in the world. You know, I was in Japan. When I was in Japan, I saw African brothers who were on the streets selling some things. You know, they were making money. And I went up to them. I was so happy to see them. I said, how'd y'all get here? We got on a plane just like you did. I was just joyful to see my people in Japan and everywhere I go. And we have to have that kind of love. And I think from that very specific love for my people is how I've gotten to this love of all people, is what I'm saying to you. But I had to learn how to love myself, you know, and I continue to learn how to love myself as a Black person. So when I don't get caught up in this one's West Indian, this one's African American, this one's African, this one's Black British, this is Black Canadian. Nope, we're all one family, one blood. Bob Marley. One love.
Yes, and the new film. And I
Yeah.
think we're gonna end it there. And thanks for hanging on for an extended period of time. And I just want to give a special shout out to my friend Kevin. Thank you for joining us yet again.
Thank
And
you.
I appreciate all that you do. And thank you for continuing to inspire all of us, and myself included in that inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We'll make sure that we get all the info out to you along with the recording and all the other events that we've had for Black History Month. And just want to thank you all for joining us on behalf of the Black Atlassian group.
Thank you all. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Jamal.